Norma Ghamrawi, and I hope I'm saying your last name correctly. I'm not sure that I've ever asked you. Norma is a professor of educational leadership at Qatar University. She is also a member of the executive board of Atlas and is one of our founding members and was there from the very beginning discussions. And so we're looking forward to your talk. Norma, take it away.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Lizzie. That was a great thing to listen to. It was very inspiring. I'm presenting about identity, agency, and the fragility of teacher leadership trajectories on behalf of myself and my colleagues who happen to be partly from Qatar and from Lebanon. So, okay. So the first thing I would like to focus on is that this study is focused on those teacher leaders who move from informal positions to formal positions, like becoming middle leaders, subject leaders in their contexts, and what happens as they move. Usually, the literature is very celebratory about teacher leadership. It speaks about teacher leaders as always being something positive, and it's like, magic, and everything is amazing, blue skies, sunshine. But as we move in depth into research, when I started my research on teacher leadership, I only saw that dimension. But now with age, with experience, with more contact with teacher leaders, it seems the things are not that simple and the waters are not really still, even if they appear as such on the surface. So this study is focused on what happens to teacher leaders, their identities, their agency itself, and their trajectories as they move from informal to formal positions. So why this study actually matters? Because it challenges that portrait that we have about teacher leaders, and that everything that surrounds that term is positive, beautiful, calm, amazing. So when we speak about teacher leaders, we should keep in mind that teacher leadership does not automatically grow when a title is added. It seems that the teacher leaders might get vulnerable to conditions surrounding that title. And to understand this vulnerability, we need to look at these core meanings in this study before I describe the study design and the findings. What is teacher agency, the influence, and teacher leadership? So teacher agency refers to teachers' capacity to act purposefully, make professional judgments, initiate improvements, and respond creatively to their contexts. Teacher leadership begins when this agency moves beyond the individual classroom and starts influencing colleagues, departments, school culture, instructional practice, and the like. So the relationship between agency and teacher leadership is dynamic. Agency enables teacher leadership, but the context regulates agency. When teachers have no agency, then teacher leadership is weak. When their agency is constrained, teacher leadership becomes fragile. And when their agency is recognized and supported, teacher leadership becomes more sustainable. This becomes especially important when we compare informal and formal teacher leadership, because informal teacher leadership is usually rooted in trust, expertise, initiative, mentoring, and collegial influence. Teachers follow or listen to an informal teacher leader because they respect that person's knowledge, support, and professional judgment. Formal teacher leadership, however, is attached to institutional titles. It often brings accountability, expectations, coordination tasks, reporting, monitoring, evaluations, etc. This is where tension actually begins. A title may recognize leadership, but it can also change how that leadership is interpreted. The same teacher who was once seen as trusted colleague may now be viewed as closer to management. So the transition is not simply you were a leader before and now you are officially a leader. That would be too simplistic. Rather, the transition changes how others read teachers' actions. A suggestion may now be interpreted as control, support might be interpreted as supervision, and initiative might be interpreted as ambition. This is why the concept of teacher leadership identity becomes central. The issue is not only what the teacher leader does, but also who they are becoming in the eyes of themselves before the eyes of others. So the teacher leadership identity is not simply about holding a leadership position. It's how teachers come to see themselves, that's self-perception, how others recognize them as legitimate leaders. And in this study, identity is understood through four interconnected dimensions. We endorse the dynamic system model, the first, which includes self-perception. Do teachers see themselves as leaders? Beliefs about teacher leadership. What do they think leadership should be about? Purpose and goals. What moral or professional aims guide their leadership? And the action possibilities. What do they believe they are actually able to do in their schools? So the DSMRI was actually the key lens we used to better understand those teachers. With this conceptual background in mind, let me briefly explain how the study was designed and how the data were generated. The study used a qualitative narrative inquiry design. It followed 5 newly appointed subject leaders in Lebanese K-12 schools across their first year in formal leadership. Data were collected through 3 rounds of semi-structured interviews across 1 academic year. And it was very interesting how the morale was decreasing every time we were actually meeting those teacher leaders. The focus was on how the transition from informal to formal teacher leadership affected 4 areas mentioned before. So the DSMRI framework was used as the analytic lens to explore this journey. And the first major finding that we will look at shows that formalization actually did not simply expand agency. In many cases, it actually narrowed it. It narrowed the space in which teacher leaders could act. The first finding is that formalization can basically constrain agency. The participants entered the roles with strong informal influence. They were already known for their initiative, energy, expertise, and support for colleagues. However, once they became formal subject leaders, their action space became narrower. They faced more administrative work, more meetings, more reporting, and more pressure to implement institutional expectations. They also had less time for mentoring colleagues and less space for creative instructional work. So this is something we called agency squeeze. On one side, the formal title gave them legitimacy, but on the other side, the duties attached to the title reduced the very autonomy and pedagogical influence that had made them, in the first place, teacher leaders. But the fragility was not only about workload and bureaucracy, it was also relational. The second finding shows that formal leadership changed how former peers perceived their teacher leaders. So before receiving the formal title, these teachers were often seen as trusted colleagues, mentors, peer supporters, and the like. After receiving the title, some were perceived differently. They became associated with the management, evaluation, authority, and institutional control. And the shift created what we call trust fracture. Some participants experienced suspicion from former peers, others faced resistance from senior colleagues, some felt emotionally distanced from their departments, while others felt caught between teachers and administration. This finding is important because it shows that teacher leadership is not only a role transition, it is also a relational repositioning. So once agency becomes constrained and relations become fragile, identity also becomes unstable. This takes us to the third finding. The third finding is that teacher-leader identity becomes unstable during the transition into formal leadership. Participants did not simply become leaders in a straightforward way. They had to constantly renegotiate who they were. At times, they were teachers. At others, they were managers. At times, they were colleagues. At others, they were evaluators, innovators versus administrators, supporters versus authoritarian, pedagogical leaders versus bureaucratic actors. So, what does this study contribute is something that really requires definitely more research, but at least with what we experienced across a whole year with those subject leaders, we can say that the study offers a less celebratory and more realistic account of teacher leadership development. Its core contribution is that teacher leadership should not be understood as a stable upward trajectory. It is not a simple movement from teacher to teacher leader and to middle leader, subject coordinator, whatever we want to call. So speaking of what the schools are recommended to do, and we do that humbly, given the small sample size, schools need to protect agency. They should keep room for judgment, creativity, and instructional influence. They should legitimize identity, teacher leadership identity. Teacher leaders should be publicly recognized as pedagogical leaders, not merely as administrative extensions of management. And we assert here that the management played some negative role without feeling with the case that we actually studied. They should preserve trust. The shift from peer to leader must be supported carefully so that teacher leaders do not lose the relationships that they made in the first place. And schools need to reduce bureaucracy, prevent as much as possible the huge amount of reports, meetings, compliance duties, and the like. So the final message is this. Teacher leadership is not sustained by titles alone. It is sustained by cultural legitimacy, organizational flexibility, and relational trust. Perhaps the question we should be discussing is not how schools appoint teacher leaders, but how they create the conditions for teacher leadership to remain meaningful, trusted, and pedagogically alive. If you are interested in some of out-of-the-box studies about teacher leadership, I invite you to look at these studies. The first one is a conceptual paper. It's an opinion paper about 10 claims about teacher leadership that merit rethinking, and these are based on 20 years of scholarship on teacher leadership. The second and the third, they speak about the role of students in developing teacher leaders. We focus always on the context that relates to other peers, to the administration, the school principal, but there's a role also for students. Action research. There's a study about action research, how it shapes teacher leadership. And AI, who are teachers who will not be replaced by AI, and the study that we conducted suggests that teacher leaders are the ones. And there's a study I have here about the last mile of distributed leadership. What happens to distributed leadership when it reaches teacher leaders? And this is a very, very interesting study. And the last two, one is about reclaiming teacher leadership as learning leadership. And the final one explores virtual teacher leadership, because we know now we have lots of virtual communities of practice for teachers, and it seems there's a new model for teacher leaders rising in that space. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.